Welcome to Chautauqua People. I'm Nancy Barger, and my guest is Rosemary Rappole. Rosemary, you come from a family of pioneers, I would say. Lots of family firsts and superlatives. So let's start with yours.
Okay.
The first woman to be fire chief in the largest state. It's remarkable, and tell us how that happened.
Well, when I went to
I should say California. Yeah, that's the largest
the state of California, 1,200 fire departments in the state. When I went there in 1980, they were not waiting for me to be the fire chief. I started out as a volunteer firefighter at Chautauqua, EMT, elected assistant chief there 3 years, 76, 78, 79, and then I went out to California. My sister and her husband were professors at University of California, Davis, which is near Sacramento, and they encouraged me to come out there. I wanted to see if I could get a career position in a department, and there weren't very many departments in the country, a few in California, that were actually starting to hire women. So that was what I was looking for. But it was very competitive. I took several tests, which consisted of a written test, a physical agility, and an interview. The written was never a problem. The physical agility was very competitive. There would be, every city was different. They'd have 12 events, strength and timing, and if you missed one event, you were off the list. And I was always competing with men, 6 foot, 6'4", or whatever, a little bigger than me. I failed some tests, and then I started to pass, and I was finally hired in Tiburon, California.
And this was national news. Did we have the photo up there? There you are. I mean, really, it would be national news to have, what, there were 1,200 fire departments, did you say, in California? That's amazing.
But that was 1993, and I had started here in Chautauqua in 73, so it was a long road. When I first was hired in Tiburon, I was firefighter EMT, but the chief wanted me to be his fire marshal. And that was a great job. The fire marshal is responsible for enforcing the fire and building codes and new construction, public education programs, and fire investigation. So it was one of those jobs where I was out in the public doing a lot of things in the community. The rest of the department had no idea where I was. And unlike Chautauqua, they paid me every week. It was great. You know, I started as a volunteer, and then I became a career firefighter. So I loved that job, and I loved where it was. I don't know if they're going to throw that picture up.
Yeah, we'll see that too. Well, I have to say, did you only apply where they had water, like Chautauqua Lake? I mean, that's gorgeous.
This is Tiburon. It's in Marin County. It's on the north shore of San Francisco Bay. It looks back at the city and the Golden Gate Bridge. It's a peninsula with water on 3 sides. The fire district protected the town of Tiburon, the city of Belvedere, in an unincorporated area, so it was a fire district. I didn't work for any of the cities. It was an elected board of fire commissioners.
What's it like sitting where you are, obviously retired from being a fire chief, and watching what's going on in California today?
The last few years have been very frightening with the wildfires, the wildland fires. And your firefighters, they train and they want to go to those fires. They're very excited to get on a strike team and be sent off to the Sierra or wherever. But if you're the chief with 42 employees, you worry to death about them. And I just worry about their personal safety. They train for it, they're experienced, but it's different terrain. And the weather, the wind changes in a moment, so it's very, very dangerous for your firefighters being out there.
You had some experience of integrating fire departments, even though you made that superlative in California. Here in Chautauqua County, and there weren't a lot of women, right?
There were very few. The most famous department is Hartfield. Hartfield had a small population, men working out of town, and they had some of the first women that were actually running the department. Chautauqua, when I went in 1973, had 97 men. They'd never had any women. And they wanted, the chief then wanted to start complying with state and federal regulations about integrating minorities and women into public agencies. So he came after me. He wanted me to come into the department. And there was another woman, Sandy Briggs, whose father and uncles and brothers and everything had been in the department for a long time, so the two of us went in together. And that was an interesting experience. Some people liked us, some people quit. Most took the attitude of wait and see. So, you know, it was fine.
Your family, on both your mother and your father's side, has been here a long time. And I know there's been so much discussion in Bemis Point about population density and building and development. Trace for us a little bit of how your family came to Bemis.
Oh, I thought the next picture was
What
Charles.
is it?
I think the next picture
Oh,
is
is it?
my
I'm
grandfather.
sorry. Okay, we'll start there. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, let's go to the other side of the family.
Okay, all right.
This is my mother's father, Charles Goodell. He grew up on a farm south of Buffalo, went to University of Buffalo Medical School, and graduated in 1910. Most young physicians would go to towns and kind of intern with whoever the local doc was. Charles stayed in Buffalo and worked with Dr. Roswell Park, who was a pretty famous surgeon in New York State. And he did specialized surgical training. And let's go to the next pic. In 1911, he married my grandmother, Francesca Bartlett, who was from Springville. And this is 1906. She was captain of the high school basketball team at what was then Griffiths Institute in Springville, New York. She went on to go to Smith College herself. They were married in 1911. In January 1912, they came to Jamestown. And he was...
Wait, I just have to look at that photo again. I love that picture, thinking that because you and I think we talked so much about how life changed with Title IX and women got into sports, but I look at that and I just can't get over that they were playing basketball
That's
school
her.
at
That's
that
her
time.
front and center, holding the ball.
That is
senior
just
in high school.
And that became Frisky.
That became Fresky, and she loved that picture. I never went into her house without her taking that off the wall to show me that picture.
All right, I interrupted you. So
That's all right. They were married in 1911. They came to Jamestown, set up practice, and he was the first surgical physician in the county, Chautauqua County. So that was a specialty at that time.
Many people are familiar with your father and your brother Bert, also surgeons.
Mm-hmm.
But
And they all went to University of Buffalo. They were all at med school in Buffalo.
yeah, that's another very important. Everybody who comes to Chautauqua wants to know about medical care, and your family certainly helped establish treatment.
My brother Bert's training probably was a little different in the 1960s than my grandfather in 1910.
Absolutely. Okay, so now we're ready for the next photo.
Now we're going to Bemis?
Yeah, I think so. You got another photo coming up? There we go.
Okay, so the Rappoles came into Chautauqua County in the early 1800s. And my great-grandfather and his wife had several different rooming houses, hotels, whatnot in Bemis Point in the 1880s. In 1893, they built the Columbian Inn, which was a 100-room hotel in the middle of the block on the waterfront.
For people who go to Bemis today, you're talking about the strip between what's ABC now that used to be, am I right, that used to be the Surf Club and goes to the Leinhart?
Yeah.
Is that where we are?
Well, it depends how old you are. If you think of that building as the Surf Club, you're older. Now it's the Ellicottville Brewery Pub or something like that. But that's where that hotel stood. That was a 150-room hotel that they built. And the hotels actually started with the Hare and Hounds, which was an inn with rooms on the second floor, dining room on the first floor. Across the street on this corner was the Rapple's Bemis Point Hotel. And then there were 4 other hotels going right down the waterfront to where the Leinhart is now. And of course, the Leinhart is the only one that's left. It's a 150-room hotel as well, owned for over 100 years by the Johnston family.
Yes, it's a very special landmark in Bemis, but it is interesting
But that whole waterfront had hotels from the Hare and Hound all the way down to the point at the Leinhart.
Right. Okay, our next photo.
Where are we going to? Oh, okay. Now, my mother's in the center there with the cross around her neck. And this is her board members from the Chautauqua Bird Tree and Garden Club. She was in the club from probably the early 1960s when we first moved to Chautauqua for the summers and had our house on the lakefront. And she was the president for 21 years, which was the longest of anybody else had been president. And So that's her group. They're on our front porch. And Chautauqua's Bird Tree and Garden Club is not an ordinary garden club. First of all, they're only around for 9 weeks, and they have many projects that they're working on in the winter. But it's not just a garden club. It's very much involved with environmental issues. It started in 1915, and they were concerned about the lake. They were concerned about developing gardens throughout the grounds. They have over 30 public gardens now, many of which were established by the Bird and Tree and endowed by the Bird and Tree. And of course, they also have special interests in nature programs, birds, bats. The lake is a real interest right now.
At what point did they start the house tours? Was it?
The house tours were started as a fundraiser for the club, I think around 1952. And they've been every other year since then, and it's the primary fundraiser. The club has about 90 programs that it offers during the summer, all free programs. A Tuesday lecture, programs on butterflies, and then there's walks and talks every day, a bird walk, a bat talk, a lake walk, all involving the environment.
And when you retired, you came back here to live and got involved with the same club.
Yeah, I came back to Chautauqua 2005, and immediately they were asking me to join the board, which made sense. I'd been away for 25 years, but I'd always been aware of what was going on with the Bird Tree and Garden Club because of my mother's involvement. So when you come on, it's a 24-member board. They put you right onto a committee. You're in charge of something. And they put me in charge of the nature programs, which was great. I didn't give the programs. I had to find the speakers during the winter and line them up and do all the coordination, for the bird walk at 7 on Monday morning and the garden walk at 4 on Tuesday and the ravine talks and all of that different kind of thing. So it was really interesting. And I did that for about 6 years. And in 2012, I took over the house tours, which is a major, major project. It takes 2 years to put the tour together. We sold 1,600 tickets in July for our last tour.
1,600. I thought it was 1,500, but so you oversold.
Yeah,
Is that it?
this last tour in July, we sold 1,600 tickets, and only about 300 are sold to people on the grounds. Our audience is small garden clubs that come in groups from all over Western New York, Northwestern PA, some from Ohio. Very excited to come on the grounds and see the gardens, the public gardens in the morning, and then the tour starts at noon, and they're right on it, getting into all those houses.
And then what does BTG use the money for after these tours?
A lot of our speakers are paid, and the other thing is we donate money back to the institution for purchase of trees. We've sponsored studies of trees. We sponsor the lake walks and studies. Just public education. All our programs are free. Yeah.
And when your mother, was it after she died, or was it just when she retired that she was honored with this, I guess you call it, not statuary, but let's see the photo of that.
Well, in the 70s and 80s, there became a real interest in what was happening with the bats, which were prevalent in Chautauqua when we were growing up. And they had some people from Cornell and from the university up in Toronto come down and study the bat populations in the attic of the old amphitheater, and there was quite a bit going on. And she was the president through that period, so after she died, the club put together a new garden at the entrance to their clubhouse, which is Smith Wilkes Hall. There's a brand new garden. It's called the Night Garden. And in the garden, there's the statue of the bat.
It's fitting that something as precious as a bat is today with the white nose?
Yeah, there's been bad disease affecting them.
would come to signify how precious your mother was to that organization. Yeah. It's very interesting. I can't help as sitting here with you and remembering as a teenager that I the first time I ever really spent any time in the deep snow and the dark skies of winter at Chautauqua was with your twin brother and you and another friend. I remember coming up and you opening up the house and building a fire. I don't think the water was turned on. I don't think there was any electricity, and it was such an adventure in those days when the institution pretty much closed down after the season.
It was very much closed down. They would try to keep the streets open, certainly for the fire service, but if you drove around, you would not see a soul unless you went to the plaza, the library, the bookstore. So if you went out into our neighborhood, there wasn't a single soul or any of the houses open. So it was kind of an adventure to go up there and see if we could clear the lake a little bit and skate, or just go up and...
I also remember that about your mother, that she had a tradition of, and those were the days when we could count on the lake freezing in the wintertime. It's not so dependable, I would say, in recent winters, but that when the lake was frozen, she would have skating parties and invite friends up to the house for hot chocolate, and that was a great little ritual.
Well, it was interesting because our house sits up on the hill. There are probably 20 steps up to the house from North Lake Drive, and then there's another 20 steps that go down, stone steps that go down to the lake. So sometimes we put our skates on the porch, and then going down all those steps was interesting.
I remember that.
But she would always make sure the fire was going when we got back, and it was...
Your family has contributed a lot to the county, and it would be difficult to branch out and list the family members on both sides of your family that came here originally, as you say, with steamboat and trolley. I mean, it was that long ago, and they all became Chautauquans.
Well, that's how they would have come to Chautauqua. Certainly the group in Bemis would have come by its steamboat. My father's family, and the Goodells probably either came by the steamboat, or at that point later in the 20s, the trolleys went up around the lake. So that would have been a way to come into the grounds. But they always talked about being at Chautauqua, coming for the operas.
The operas were big in your family. I remember that as well. That was the days of when I remember with your cousin Kathy, always dressed in full long dress, going to the opera at Norton Hall. And those days are past.
Yeah, it is. Do you remember they did a different opera every week for 8 weeks?
Yes, I do. Friday and Monday.
I don't know how they got the sets together. I don't know. It was quite a production.
Quite a production. And you have an interesting education, your master's in journalism, which says to me that you ought to be writing the family history book. But you started out as a photographer when you first came out of college, working for a familiar name in Chautauqua, Jim Mead. What was that like?
Well, when I came home in '71, and my brothers were all off in school or in the Army or whatever, and my mother wasn't too well, so I thought, well, I'm just going to go back there and get myself organized. And I was a freelance photographer, and Jim Mead hired me to do his photography and feature writing for the little Westfield Republican paper. So that was fun, and it just got me all over the north end of the county, which I was not that familiar with growing up in Jamestown, and I was settled in Chautauqua, which is how I got into that fire department.
And now you live in Mayville.
I'm in Mayville, top of the lake.
You go to the grounds frequently, I know that.
Oh, we're there almost every day during the summer. Yeah, definitely. Lectures, symphony. Yeah. I see we have enough time, I think, to branch out into something that's going on locally at the Jackson Center that is very special to many people who know of your Uncle Charlie. Do you want to just talk about that for a second? Well, my mother was the oldest of the 6 siblings. Charlie was the youngest. And he went to Congress in 1959, a moderate Republican from this district, and served well, worked well across the aisle. I'm always aware of that. And then when Bobby Kennedy was killed, Governor Rockefeller appointed Charles to the Senate in 1968, and that was an amazing year. It was a difficult year for the country. It was a difficult year for Lyndon Johnson, the Tet Offensive and the Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, and then Johnson decided not to run, and Nixon and Agnew went into office. And that's where Charles found himself.
And I'm not sure, I should know this, but I don't think we've ever had another U.S. Senator from Chautauqua County.
No, I don't think so.
And I would venture to say it would be very difficult to have one in the future. We're a rural area, and it was exceptional. I have not seen the exhibit that is there at the Jackson Center yet. I'm looking forward to it, but I'm sure it focuses very much on the fact that your Uncle Charles is rather well known for speaking up against the Vietnam War early in that time.
He did have a conscience and strong feelings about why we were in the war, and were they telling us the truth, the administration, not just the public, but the Congress, were they telling them the truth about what was going on and why we weren't getting out of it. And he wrote the legislation which eventually took us out of the war, and it basically cut the funding for the war. Yeah.
Very important. Well, I can't believe
it also ended his career in that he was put on the top of Nixon's enemy list.
Yes, he lost his election. I remember that well. As a college student, he came onto my campus when we were having a moratorium against the war, and there was a lot of competition for that seat after that happened. But it's a part of history for sure.
The exhibit is excellent. It was done by a young man from St. Bonaventure, and he put the exhibit together, but he also did a great video about Charles's career.
Cameron Hurst, I haven't met him yet. Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing it. Apparently he's a good, very talented young man. So what's next for you? I thought you were going to retire. I read that article in the Chautauqua Daily a few weeks ago, and I had the impression that you were not going to be the chair, but I think you're going to retain that title for a while. I'm hearing that now. People are telling me already that they've been asked to have their house on the tour in 2 years.
Well, it is a long planning process, and I have been doing it for 6 years, and I was wearing down a little bit, and I talked to the president about maybe dividing it up a little bit, where you have a new chair and a subcommittee for looking at the houses, which is happening right now, and another chair for doing other tasks, and I would just continue as the coordinator with that experience.
I wonder if everybody knows that you have men and women in the Tree and Garden Club.
Oh, absolutely. We're not a real garden club.
But when you looked at the group picture from the 70s, it's all women.
Yes.
So just to get that out there, that men are welcome and very valuable.
Oh, absolutely. We have several men. I'm thinking of one who's now in charge of the Lake Walks. He's retired science professor at one of the junior colleges, and we have another one who's finance expert, and we take everybody. Then we figure out what their expertise is, what they want to do, and we have lots of spots for them.
Well, I would just repeat that there are many family members that I think of your, I guess is it your cousin Seska, who's the caterer, who, there are lots of people that we run into, and coming in here tonight somebody asked about the veterinarian, which is Robert, and it goes on, and I thank you for talking to us about what your family's been able to contribute to Chautauqua County, but most of all, what comes clear to me is their love of settling here so long ago and returning. Mm-hmm. It's very noticeable. Is there anything else that I thought this was going to fly by, but we were so organized that we have a little time left.
Yeah, I could have spent a lot more time in Bemis, but that.
Well, the Pickards were another family that you were related to, and there's still Pickards around. And
the Pickard House was one of the hotels on the lakefront. They're related to one of my uncles by marriage. Yeah.
All right. I thank you very much, Rosemary, for the time, and look forward to, I hope you write a family history, because I think coming off of this morning, the panelists at the amphitheater talking about storytelling, and I really had the impression that after Ken Burns and Jeffrey Ward and Duncan were talking, it really sounded to me like documentarians could very much unite this country, and I think you've got some more stories to tell. Thank you very much.
We'll see.
And thank you for